Good morning. Good morning. Oh, there's my talk. So the Groundwater Management Act, SGMA, State Groundwater Management Act, was here it is. Was put out by Jerry Brown back in the 1990s, and only now, this year, 2020-22, has it finally been fully implemented throughout the state. And what the heck is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act? Well, basically, it's looking at all of the groundwater in California and how it's managed, and to show equitable use of that water to all individuals as well as to the environment, and to confront the issues of potential contamination and misuse of that water. So this talk is actually a compilation of and decompilation of ideas that Thomas Harder put together at UC Davis. And so I'm feeding off of it, what he put together here and making it applicable to avocados in Southern California, where avocados are generally grown. So the issue of the State Groundwater Management Act is because water is generated in different parts of the state, but it's used in other parts. So the water primarily is coming out of the Sierras, and it flows downhill into the Central Valley and flows in a giant pipeline down into Southern California, and it comes over from the Colorado River into Southern California. So water is being used in where it's not being generated. Thomas Harder is a German, and he's put some of these figures as English units as well as what are they called? Metric units. And so irrigated agriculture is 9.5 million acres. And its water use is about 30 million acre feet. And if you translate that 30 million acre feet, it's 45 cubic kilometers of water. That's a lot of water. And it's the largest user out by human beings. Water use in the major metropolitan areas only represents about 8 million acre feet. And then environmental use, which includes water that's actually evapotranspired by forests and so on, represents 45 million acre feet. So it's about half going into agriculture, half into urban use, and the other half going into environmental use. The total surface area that is, reservoirs that store water is about 40 million acre feet. And it turns out that Southern California has recognized this issue of potential drought for much longer than Northern California has. And there's actually substantial amounts of water storage that are in Southern California. But these are designed, the reservoirs are designed to bridge our Mediterranean climate of rainfall in the wintertime and drought in the summertime. And it does a fairly decent job in Southern California, much less so in the Central Valley though. California is quite unusual. These maps show the variability that exists in water. I'm not sure why the maps show the East Coast in pink. Actually, the East Coast has less variability. You hear about all these rains that they get, but they rarely get droughts. Well, climate change is changing that, but the variability in rainfall is much less side versus what we have in the blue zone, where we have extreme variability. So deserts are defined as, and by the way, we are a Mediterranean climate, not a desert, as so many people claim. Ventura gets about 18 inches of rainfall Escondido gets about 15 inches of rainfall, but that average doesn't mean a whole hell of a lot. We get 50 inches of rain here and we get 5 inches of rain. And so the average is 18, but it's more common to get less than 18 than it is common to get to above 18. Anyway, so the variability is extreme in California. And that's why we are having to deal with these issues of groundwater. Because when the storage we looked to groundwater, and we had groundwater depletion in much of California for years. California, it goes back at least 100 years. And that's one reason why there's so many more reservoirs found in Southern California. It's because the groundwater in general has been depleted at a greater rate. There's been more contention over water, and we've had what are called adjudicated water basins in Southern California for a much longer time than anywhere else in California. So these are the averages that show highest year we had, and these are averages that come out of the Central Valley. Highest rainfall year was 77 inches. That is a lot of water, but in low rainfall years, Central Valley has been measuring 15 inches of rainfall. And this is where we stand right now, or this is where we stood as of 24 inches for the rainy season for last year. So, we are into a drought. There's no doubt about that. Here is what the forecast is as of May, the forecast into this year. And it shows that we are heading into a period where there's going to be very, very low rainfall. Okay, so this is, again, this is the history that leads up to the SGMA. This shows the variability of distribution of drought over the years. So there was very little variation in drought. We had drought, but what we're looking at here is the last few years, very significant amounts of statewide drought. Previously, we were seeing drought happening in primarily Southern California and getting more than adequate rainfall in Northern California. But what we're seeing now is on an area-wide basis, the droughts that are occurring in California are affecting more than just Southern California, but they're affecting the whole state. In fact, if you look at places like Seattle, which is noted for its wet conditions, they are dealing with drought up there as well. Here's a really interesting timeline. This is the last 500 years of measured drought. And it's kind of interesting how this is represented. These peaks are periods of drought. This is the period when the Anasazi disappeared from Arizona and New Mexico. Where did they go? People don't know. This is when the Maya suddenly disappeared from Mexico. What happened to them? Well, it was this period of drought on drought that happened during this period in the 1400s. And so this is what we're facing right now, this period of accelerated drought. Okay, so in the last 48 years, we've been looking at high rainfall years and low rainfall years. And back in the 1970s and 80s, about half the years were above average and about half were below average rainfall. And again, this is kind of generic for the whole state. 24 years, we've looked at 8 years of above rainfall and 16 years below rainfall. So it's, variability that's existing in California is being more and more accentuated. So we've got to come to grips with it. These are the different large water basins found in California. This is the Southern California basin. It's showing that in general, the groundwater storage. Okay, so we've been looking at rainfall. Now we're looking at groundwater storage. It has been more and more tapped into. The phenomenon throughout the state. And so, we've heard these horrific stories about the extraction of water that's been happening in the Central Valley, where there's been expansion of lots of crops that are much more water intensive, and we're getting subsidence of the ground level, dropping 40 to 50 feet in some areas. And with that collapse, there's actually a collapse of the aquifers. So there's actually less storage potential when there is rain. So because of all of this history, the state Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was enacted in 2014 by Gary Brown. And the act is looking at reducing and turning around a whole range of issues. So looking at groundwater levels, looking at affecting storage of water, looking at seawater intrusion here along the coast. Saltwater intrusion has been an issue in places like Santa Maria and San Diego for over 100 years. So we've known that this has been going on. Looking at groundwater degradation from salinity. Every time we irrigate, we're putting on saline water, and we're increasing the salinity of the groundwater, and also through use of various chemicals such as fertilizers and pesticides. Looking at land subsidence and looking at surface water depletion. So the Groundwater Act is looking at more than just what is being pumped out of the ground. It's looking at the consequences of pumping more water. And so this is a statewide mandate, but it is under what's called local control. So the regulations come out of Department of Water Resources. It is pieced by the State Water Control Resource Control Board, and then the plans that are devised for meeting the demands of SGMA devised by local groups. So each basin has agency, a group of people that decide on how to best come into compliance with SGMA. So there's 250 agencies throughout the state, and each agency has to develop a plan. A lot of these plans are specifically, how do you deal with drought? How do you deal with managing irrigation systems? How do you import more water? How do you more beneficially use water that you have? How do you reclaim and recycle water that you do have? These are quite detailed. And first of all, you have to identify what is the water that is available in that groundwater basin, and then decide how best to use that. So there are these critically overdrafted basins, and in general, now there's some that are along the coast, but it's really interesting. Again, there's been a history of tension over water, groundwater basins, people fighting over water in Southern California. And in many cases, lawsuits that have been brought and been resolved even going back to the 1920s. So in some cases in Southern California, these adjudicated basins have been worked out. There's a tendency to have fewer of these overdrafted basins. This is a map of that was generated by the Farm Bureau. Actually, the Farm Bureau has got some really good information about Sigma and the consequences to growers. And the red area, the dark area, is the area that has the greatest threat, the greatest contention at this point, the greatest changes that have to be implemented. Although basins, there are plans that have to be developed to address groundwater issues. So again, the plans that are developed for Sigma to come into compliance are developed by GSA. These are groundwater sustainability agencies, and they from a city to a water district to suppliers to water management to land use areas. So 250 in the state, and as of year, all of them have supplied their plans to the state to show how they will come into compliance. So the whole idea is that we need groundwater to meet the needs of healthy people, a healthy economy, and a healthy environment. And monitored, managed, evaluated for these 6 different characteristics: groundwater depletion, surface water depletion, groundwater quality, seawater intrusion, and so on. So the plans that are developed, these groundwater sustainability plans, have a structure. You know, it's all broken down. You got to do this, this, and this. One of the first things is to identify the groundwater environment and what's there, and what the recharge and annual uses, and then to show what implementation would do if it were so basically it boils down to what is going in and what is coming out. And so can you import more water to resolve the problem, or can you reduce how water is used, how water is pumped, or can you work out some combination of these things? And so these groundwater plans are really quite complex, which you're looking at the whole system. And in many cases, the whole system is not well defined. What is coming in, what is going out, who's using water. I know we did a study here in Ventura looking at water use in strawberry fields. And water is not just being used to irrigate, it's being used for pest control. It's because you're mixing chemicals. It's been using for dust control. It's been being used to flush filters. So it's being used for salinity management. So water use on a farm is much more complex than just simply, oh, it's the amount of water being used by the plant. Okay, so these various factors have objectives that have to be identified. What are the levels that are achievable through different plans, and then it has to be monitored. So whatever the plans are that are introduced, are they being successful? If not, how can they be modified? So all of the agencies have to develop plans, and the plans all have monitoring requirements. So basically the plans are developing and understanding the environment and engaging growers in using these plans that are introduced. So, you know, a lot of this goes back to what is the effect on water that's coming out of the ground. The bulk of waters in the state are groundwaters, and this becomes a primary goal of the Groundwater Act, is to reduce the contamination that occurs to drinking water. So, so in each case, you have to decide what is being measured. So are you measuring selenium? Well, how do you measure selenium? Where do you measure selenium? Method do you use to measure selenium? So these all have to be clearly identified. So these plans are really quite complex. And you can see exactly what these plans are for the 250 different agencies. Each one is online now. And a lot of the plans have overlapping definitions and protocols that are to be filed. The question comes up, how does SGMA affect you as a grower? How will it affect your groundwater pumping? What are your responsibilities? It does not take water away from you. It defines how you have to use water, though. And each of the plans reflects the local conditions. So are you growing alfalfa, and can you grow something else? Are you in reclaimed water? Can you use more reclaimed water? That sort of thing. Most of the plans involve use of meters. So you have to know how much water you're using, how much is being used. And in fact, you know, every irrigator should have a meter just so they can better manage their irrigation system. You have to know when the leaks are happening and when the clogs are happening, and only a meter can tell you that unless you're out walking the lines every day. A lot of them involve installation of SGMA stations. There are already about 150 stations in the state, and make sure that everyone has access to evapotranspiration information. Most of them have rebate programs for improving their irrigation system. A lot of times, you know, swapping out drippers for emitters is relatively cheap, but there are rebate systems that are going to be included in a lot of these plans. In some cases, fallowing is going to be encouraged, crop conversion to higher value crops for a given amount of water. There are plans for increased groundwater storage. This is a lot of this is going on in Central Valley, but in some places like Orange County and Los Angeles County, there's going to be increased amounts of reclaimed water used. I know the city of Ventura now is in the process of installing reclaimed water. So there's going to be a general movement towards improving water availability and accessibility and management of water. And so here's an example of a plan. I forgot for where this was, but if you go through identify what the problems are and then how they're going to be implemented. So it's pretty clear how anyone can read these things and see what each groundwater agency is going to be doing. So the protocols that are promoted in the plans, are instituted, and then over a period of time, monitoring is done on the groundwater. If the goals are not being achieved, other protocols will be introduced or strengthened. And this is a process that is actually a 20-year process. So there's an iterative process of you do something, you measure it, you evaluate it, then you look at it and make changes, and then you look at it, and then so it's you know, some of these things like introducing a desal plant, and reclaimed water, a distribution system. And at Escondido, they've done this, and you know, it took 5 to 10 years to build the system. So some of these plans are going to take longer to institute than others. So the state's there, Department of Water Resources is there to set the guidelines, and then State Water Resources Control Board is there to make sure it's done. And you can see the library that is available. So that's it. And if you have more questions, ask Thomas Harder at UC Davis. He can fill you in.
Thank you, Ben.